My name is Dolores. Sitting across from me at the kitchen table was a man my family had warned me about for 25 years. He looked into my eyes and uttered 6 words that shattered the world I'd known. I think you already know. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to hold on to the coffee cup he'd given me. I set it down quickly, afraid I'd drop it on the polished wooden floor. Before this moment, I believed I was the middle child of Robert and Elise Thompson, a well-to-do family living in a large, white colonial house on Elm Street in a posh suburb of Boston. My older brother, Henry, was the apple of my parents' eyes. He was destined for great things, following in my father's footsteps as a high-powered corporate lawyer. My younger sister, Lily, was the delicate flower, always showered with affection and praise. I, on the other hand, was the odd one out. My father, Robert, was a strict and imposing man. He was a partner at a prestigious law firm, and his life revolved around numbers, contracts, and court cases. Emotions were a foreign concept to him. Whenever I showed any sign of vulnerability, he'd turn his back and walk away. My mother, Elise, was a woman of grace and poise on the surface, but there was a coldness beneath. She ran the household with an iron fist, setting strict rules and expecting everyone to follow them without question. Across the street from our house stood a charming old Victorian home, painted in a deep shade of purple. It was surrounded by a beautiful garden that was in bloom year-round. A man named Gabriel lived there. He was an artist, known for his breathtaking oil paintings. From the time I was a child, my parents had drilled it into my head that Gabriel was dangerous. "Stay away from that man," my mother would hiss as we passed his house on our way to the park. "He's not like us." "He has a wild streak," my father would add, his voice laced with disdain. Of course, being a curious child, I had to know why. I asked my parents countless times what Gabriel had done, but they always evaded my questions. "You'll understand when you're older," my mother would say. As I got older, the answer changed to "some things are better left alone." When I was 18 and pressed harder, my father slammed his fist on the dining table and roared, "I don't want to hear his name in this house ever again." But I couldn't help myself. I would often watch Gabriel from my bedroom window. He would wake up early every morning, sit on his porch with a cup of coffee, and paint the sunrise. He had a friendly golden retriever named Max, who would play in the garden with him. He would wave to the neighbors, and they would wave back with warm smiles. I would lie in my bed at night, listening to the soft music that drifted from his house, and wonder what kind of monster he really was. I left home for college at 20, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' house. I went to Harvard University, majoring in art history. After graduation, I landed a job at a well-known art gallery in New York City. I built a life for myself, far away from Elm Street. I dated a nice man named David for a few years, but the relationship never really took off. Then, one day, my father called. My mother had suffered a heart attack, and they needed me to come home. I took the first flight back to Boston. When I arrived at the house, it was as if time had stood still. The white paint was a little chipped, and the front yard needed some attention, but otherwise, it was the same. My mother was in a wheelchair, looking frail and defeated. My father had aged significantly, his hair now completely white. I stayed in my old bedroom, which had been turned into a storage room. As I was looking for a blanket one night, I came across a box in the corner. Inside, I found an old envelope. It was sealed, and there was no name on it. I opened it, and my world came crashing down. The first picture was of my mother, Elise, when she was very young, maybe 20. She was pregnant, smiling radiantly, and standing in Gabriel's garden. The man with his arm around her, looking at her with adoration, was Gabriel. The second picture was of them on the porch swing, holding hands. The third picture was of a newborn baby, wrapped in a blanket, in Gabriel's arms. On the back of the picture, in a handwriting I didn't recognize, it said, "Our daughter, June 1995. I was born in June 1995. I sat on the cold floor, surrounded by these pictures, and realized that everything I'd ever known was a lie. Underneath the pictures was a birth certificate. It stated that my name was Dolores Marie Hughes, my mother was Elise Marie Hughes, and my father was Gabriel James Hughes. The birth certificate I'd grown up with said my last name was Thompson, and my father was Robert Thompson. The next morning, I asked my mother casually, "Mom, where was I born?" She looked up from her breakfast, her eyes cold. "Massachusetts General Hospital." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." "Was it a difficult birth?" I probed. "All births are difficult," she replied curtly. "Was Dad there?" I continued. She put down her fork and stared at me. "Why are you so interested all of a sudden?" "I just realized I don't know much about my birth," I said. "Some things are better left alone," she said, her voice firm. I took a deep breath and decided to confront the truth. I walked across the street and rang Gabriel's doorbell. He opened the door, and when he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "Dolores," he said, as if he'd been waiting a lifetime to say my name. He invited me in, and his house was filled with art and warmth. He sat me down at the kitchen table and gave me a cup of coffee. Then he began to tell me the story. He and my mother had fallen in love when she was just 20 and he was 30. They were planning to get married and start a family. But my mother's parents, my grandparents, were extremely wealthy and influential. They didn't approve of Gabriel because he was an artist, not a respectable professional. When my mother was 8 months pregnant, they forced her to come back to Boston. They threatened Gabriel, telling him that if he ever tried to see my mother or me again, they would ruin his career. My mother, under pressure, married Robert Thompson, a man her parents had chosen for her. They forged a new birth certificate, and I was raised as a Thompson. Gabriel moved across the street, hoping to be close to me. He watched me grow up from afar, writing me a letter every year on my birthday, but he never had the courage to send them. I listened to his story, tears streaming down my face. For 25 years, I'd felt like an outsider in my own family, and now I knew why. I spent the next few weeks with Gabriel, reading all the letters he'd written to me. Each one was filled with love and longing. I also decided to take legal action. I hired a lawyer named Sarah, who specialized in family law. She helped me correct my birth certificate. It took several months, but in the end, I got my real birth certificate. My name was Dolores Marie Hughes, and Gabriel was my father. When I told my brother and sister the truth, Henry was shocked but understanding. He was angry at our parents for keeping the secret for so long. Lily, on the other hand, was more emotional. She felt betrayed but also relieved that the truth was out. My father, Robert, finally apologized to me. He said he'd done what he thought was best for me, but he realized now that it was wrong. My mother, Elise, never apologized. She was too proud to admit her mistake. Gabriel and I are building a relationship now. It's not easy, considering we've lost 25 years, but we're making the most of it. I visit him every weekend, and he's teaching me how to paint. I've also met my aunt, Gabriel's sister, who lives in Maine. She has a daughter named Sophie, who is my cousin. They've been waiting for me to come into their lives for a long time. Looking back, I realize that the people who love you should never make you fear others. They should never hide the truth from you. I've learned to trust my instincts, the small voice inside me that always knew something was wrong. And I've learned that sometimes, the most unexpected people can turn out to be the ones who love you the most.